Bookfest and for Tulane School of Liberal Arts for co-sponsoring this panel. I'm thrilled that everyone agreed to be here, and thank you all for showing up. I'm going to briefly introduce our authors and agents, and then get on with hopefully demystifying a little bit of the process or relationship between authors and agents. Pemi Aguda is from Lagos, Nigeria. She has an MFA from the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan. Her writing has been published in Granta, Zoetrope, Plowshares, One Story, among others, and has won O. Henry prizes. Her novel, In Progress, won the 2020 Deborah Rogers Foundation Writers Award. She was a 2021 Fiction Fellow with the Miami Book Fair, a McDowell Fellow, and is the current Hortense Spiller's assistant editor at Transition Magazine. Her first book, Ghost Roots, was a finalist for the National Book Awards in fiction. Renée Zuckerbrot is a literary agent and founder of Renée Zuckerbrot Agency, where she represents authors at all stages of their careers, from debut writers to established voices. Before launching her agency, she worked as an editor at Doubleday and Franklin Square Press, Harper's Magazine. Passionate about championing her clients, she takes a hands-on approach to every aspect of the publishing process, from project development and editing to contract negotiation, marketing, and career strategy. Katherine Fausset. Oh, sorry, yes, applause. Katherine Fausset has worked in book publishing since 1998 and is vice president of Curtis Brown, Ltd. She represents literary fiction, commercial fiction, and select nonfiction. Her clients include multiple award-winning national and international best-selling authors. Thank you. And Crystal Hana Kim is the author of the critically acclaimed novels The Stone Home, a current finalist for the Maya Angelou Book Award, and If You Leave Me, which was named a Best Book of 2018 by over a dozen publications. Kim is the recipient of the 2022 National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 Award and the winner of a 2017 PEN Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers. She lives in Brooklyn with her family. Thank you for being here. So I'd like to start with a question for the authors. And I want you to think back to the phrase getting an agent and what that summons for you. In writing programs and online chat groups, even everyday conversations, many writers fantasize about getting an agent and how that will be transformative for them, and a kind of gateway to getting their work published. What was that process like for you, and was it what you expected?
I'll go first. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. So for me, I went to grad school at Columbia, and I remember people would talk about having an agent, but a lot of the professors would also suggest holding off until you're done with the work. You know, I think in graduate programs, they really want to focus on the art. But I did take that advice into consideration because I didn't want someone else's opinions shaping my first novel. So I waited until I was done with the novel, which was, I graduated from the MFA in 2014, and I was finished with the novel, I think, around 2016. At that point, I had met a couple of agents, maybe from conferences, and I also had a dream list of agents that Katherine was on, based on other writers' works that I really admired. You know, I looked at their acknowledgements page and looked up their agents and looked at their client list and tried to figure out who I admired for the breadth of their work and for the themes that their clients were tackling. And then I just started cold querying. I wrote a query letter and sent it off, and Katherine was one of the agents who responded, and I would say that I think it took, I mean, it was so long ago, it was 2016, but I think it took a couple of months, I would say, for the responses to trickle in. Some people said no right away, some people said, can I have the manuscript? It took a while, and I just remember that when we had our conversation, I really felt like you understood what I was trying to do with the work on a thematic level. You understood kind of the larger questions that I was exploring in my first novel, If You Leave Me. And so I just felt like we were a really good fit. Yeah.
Nice.
So before I came to the US for grad school, agents weren't thin, like people, the concept of an agent was foreign to me. And so when I got to grad school, people would say, oh, I'm looking forward to, querying agents. And I was like, who are these mythical beings? But I went to grad school in the University of Michigan, and a cool thing about that program was that they invited agents through once in a while, and one of those agents happened to be Renée. And so Renée read the first 5 pages of a short story and offered to send it out, to editors for publication in a literary magazine. And then I did Teen House, I think, or Breadloaf, I'm not quite sure, where I met another agent who was also interested in one particular short story, but neither one of them offered representation. They were just like, we really like this story. We're going to send it out for you. And so on the other end of your journey, Crystal, I didn't know who the good agents were. I didn't make a list. I didn't have any dream agents. I just thought, here are 2 people who are interested in me. And then when I thought I was ready, the 3rd year of my MFA was a fellowship year. So we weren't teaching, we weren't going to classes, we were just supposed to work on our projects. And I figured this is a good time to have an agent, somebody to kind of have collaborative, experience with while I'm working on something. And so I reached out to these 2 agents, sent them my manuscript. And eventually, I decided that I wanted to work with Renée because I saw that she was somebody who was interested in the short story. I am, at the time, considered myself a short story writer primarily. So I wanted an agent who was interested in short story, who was interested in the craft of short stories, and wouldn't pressure me into writing a novel because that's what writers are expected to do. And Renée, champions. She was really, she used to be, and so she's involved with one story in some capacity. So I knew that she was really interested in short stories. Kelly Link is one of her clients. Kelly Link didn't have a novel until last year, I think. So it was good to have kind of that person to look up to say, oh, you've been very successful just on short stories. And it's kind of the path I was interested in at the time.
So asking the question in the reverse for the agents, how do you think about the phrase getting an agent, and what does it mean from your perspective? Is it sometimes misunderstood what it means?
I can, if you want. I think it is misunderstood. I think Pemi and I were just talking about this a little bit on the car ride over, that we performed some kind of magic, that no matter what the manuscript is or what the publishing environment is, that we pull our puppet strings and miraculous things happen. And so, and that will be smooth sailing all the way once you have an agent. And like any other business, there are always bumps in the road. So while we advocate and while we do our best, we can't make magic happen. So it's a collaboration, and there needs to be communication and sort of understanding of how publishing works. So we talk about managing expectations and just sort of understanding what the publishing landscape is like, and it changes. I mean, there was a time where it was like nearly impossible to sell just a collection without a novel, and that shifted. And so it's really just about being honest while still being passionate and advocating for your client's work. But once again, like, if I figure out how to work magic, I'll let you know. And I will work magic for all my clients. So I'll turn it over to Katherine.
Yeah, no, I would agree with all of that. I love, Pemi, the idea of the agent as the mythical creature. Yes, we're mythical creatures. And on that note, the first time I ever heard of the word literary agent, I grew up here in New Orleans, and one summer did a internship in Oxford, Mississippi for the Oxford American that was based there then. And I remember these 2 writers, Johnny Miles and a writer named Larry. You all know him as Larry, and I'm blanking on his last name. Anybody? Wonderful writer. Larry Brown. Thank you. Used to be a fireman, wonderful writer. They were joking about their New York agent who would come to Oxford wearing her leather jacket when it was 90 degrees. And, they were kind of, mocking her a little bit, but I could tell they really liked talking about their New York agent. And I just thought, and I was in college, I was thinking, like, who is this, leather jacket wearing agent coming to Oxford, Mississippi, and these, writers are talking about her. So, so getting an agent, I think there is that sort of, lore of once you get the agent, you're kind of in. And it certainly is a very important step in the process. I mean, without an agent, unless you self-publish or work with a smaller press, we are the first stop. But you do hear stories about agents who are unfortunately not doing their job well, and so some people do get an agent, and then things don't go well. And it's a real shame when you talk to those writers who their agents have not served them well, and so hate to bring up a cynical part of the business, but it does happen sometimes. It's not with me or Renee, obviously. but,
So, as these non-mythical beings who may still seem mythical to some, what is your role in getting a book published?
What is our role in getting the book? Well, what isn't our role in getting the book? No, well, first and foremost, it comes from the big, beautiful, weird brains of our clients. I mean, weird in the best way. So, we are working in service to them. We wouldn't have jobs without the writers. You can elaborate on anything I forget here, but basically, what's really fun, at least for me, with the real joy of the job, one of them is being the first person who gets to start talking about sometimes like the kernel of the idea with an author. Like I remember for the Stone Home, we met over drinks, and you were telling me about these institutions you had heard about in Korea who had been taking children and people off the street to, as a horrible manner, and ultimately, keeping them there as workers. And just to be with you, hearing, what inspired what has become this beautiful novel. I mean, I hate to sound overly earnest, but it's true. It's really, really a joy of the job. So you're there at the beginning, you get to be engaged. I mean, I think you would say, like, the job is so fun because you get to talk to writers all the time and hear what's going through their minds. And so you're there at the beginning. Some agents do more editorial work than others, just depends on the writer and the agent. And then we try to find the best editor who will be the best team member for the author. Then we negotiate the contract. And then after that, we kind of just, we're sort of come on as needed. We fill in gaps where, if the author doesn't like their cover, you don't want the author and the editor having an unpleasant conversation. So we might jump in and, try to give our perspective or smooth things over, as the case may be.
Yeah, we are the bad cops in that scenario, and we want our authors to be the good cops. So yeah, basically what Katherine said, and there's something really exciting when a manuscript lands on your desk. I mean, metaphorically, it's now all digital, but still, when it lands on your desk and you start reading it, and you know that there's something really special on the page, and then, well, what I do and Katherine does is you read it and you set up a call with the author and you talk about, your ideas for revising and where you see the book in the marketplace and the houses/editors you would send it to. And then you also talk about how you work as an agent. Will you be talking to, it's great when an author says, will I be talking with you or your assistant? How do you like to communicate? And so all of those nuggets of information are really important for a writer when he or she is making a decision about representation, because sometimes there are multiple offers, which we refer to as a beauty contest, or a bake-off is the other one I've heard. And so, it really behooves the writer to get a sense of how the different agents work and, how they think about edits and how they think about collaboration, because it's very collaborative. So once we sell a manuscript, as Katherine said, like, we're there to smooth things over, but we're also CC'd on everything just to make sure everyone is doing their job, right? Marketing's doing what they're supposed to do. Publicity, if you have sold any rights, UK rights or translation rights for a serial, most of the big five take audio, so that's not really up for negotiation. But you just want to make sure that the publisher is doing everything they're supposed to do, and that, the author is informed and the author has an idea of, how the book is coming together in the whole publication process.
So it sounds like one of the theme words here is collaboration, and I'm just curious for the authors how you think about that collaborative relationship with your agent, and is it helpful? Does it make your writing life easier?
Yeah, I mean, thank God for Katherine. The way that I approach it, I like to do, the first draft on my own, so I would say I don't want collaboration at that moment until I have the full shape of a book, because I just really want to be inside my own mind. But then after that, I so rely on Katherine for her thoughts on the book before we send it out, and also for all of the kind of like emotional support and practical support of understanding the business side of publishing. You know, I don't know about you, Pemi, but before my first book, I didn't know anything about like what a publicist was or a marketing rep, which I still don't really understand the difference, and how that whole process even unfolds over the course of a year once you have signed with an editor. I didn't know any of that, so I felt so grateful to have Katherine there as kind of somebody who has done it before and can guide me through the process and be the bad cop if need be. And I can't read a contract. So, you know, all of these things, it is so collaborative in that sense. And I also think it's so important to, I'm assuming you're here because you're trying to find an agent, maybe. I think it's so important to find one that you have a good communication style with, and that a person who you think really understands you as a person, rather than just as a writer or as a business kind of product. And I really felt that from you, because it is, you know, I think for me at least, when I'm writing and finishing a book, it's an art, and then at some point of the process, it becomes a product for some people. You know, like I think the publishing house does kind of think of it as a product or a business, and so there's a strange disconnect for me there, and so I really need somebody who understands that to me it's really precious, it's an art, and that can kind of be with me through that process. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think hard same. In terms of the work, I wanted an agent who would do edits with me before we sent it out to editors or magazines, you know, and Renée was that for me. I had a friend who said she wanted her relationship with her agent to be like the one she has with her mom, which is just very critical and harsh. She's like, that's when I can do the work, when I know my mom is mad at me. That's not what I wanted. I kind of wanted
I don't want that.
I wanted somebody to hold my hand and say, honey, this is good, but this is not good, you know, and Renée is really good at that. I'm also the kind of person who wants to know as little as possible in this process, especially, you know, once the contract is signed and the book is, you know, everything. I don't want to know. And so it's wonderful to have like an advocate, but also a buffer, so that my innocence in some, you know, for lack of a better word, my innocence is protected. So Renée like stands between me and like the ugly parts of publishing, which thank you.
You're welcome. I also think of it as like preserving your writing time, not just like a barrage of emails about things that in process you only need to really know the outcome.
So it sounds like for everyone, it's about finding the right fit. So for the agents, do you have a philosophy about being an agent, in the sense that you're very hands-on or you're hands-off, or you like to play bad cop, or you like people who don't hands-off until the draft is done, or?
I think the word bad cop is so funny. I think anyone who's in this room who knows me, because I see my parents are here, knows that I'm not really a bad cop, as a, raised here as a Southern girl. But you really feel your bad cop coming out is when you're advocating for something that you really believe in and you love, and then you can go bad cop, and it's a really unexpectedly fun part of the job for me, I have to say. But I'll be very gracious if I meet you after this panel. But it's a great question. I mean, a philosophy as an agent, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, because, and in fact, I'm going to kind of steal from what you said, because I think my philosophy as an agent is finding that balance of an artist's, being the artist's person on their team, part of their community. I think it's essential. I have a friend here, Caroline Alterman, who is a very talented local artist. She does these wonderful collages. And I was so interested when she told me that she works on her paintings and her collages with a mentor, and sometimes she'll talk to other people in her studio. And like an idiot, I thought, oh, of course, like visual artists also, are in conversation maybe before we even see the art. And I know that from publishing, absolutely, but I hadn't thought of that. So it just occurred to me that, art, I mean, yes, there's J.D. Salinger in his cabin, or I don't know, Henry Darger doing his weird paintings in Chicago in his apartment, but like everyone else, to be an artist, yes, well, so what I was gonna say, the balance I think is I want to be someone who makes the artist feel supported and has another set of eyes when they may need one, when they're feeling vulnerable or, financially vulnerable or artistically, maybe a little off their game, to be that person for them. I mean, after all, the artist is creating art to engage with others, so it makes sense that others would be involved in the process to some degree. But the balance is what Renée was saying, also respecting their art, that we play a role in trying to think, what can we sell as agents, and what is the writer doing that is important to them? I mean, you all sit at desks for, probably below minimum wage often of the hours you spend, missing your kids' drop off or whatever it is you're doing. It's a really grueling job. And so, it's our job, to make sure that someone will buy it and hopefully we can sell it, but also to preserve what is important to you and your vision for the book. And so for me, it's really trying to achieve that balance.
Yeah, I think the aligned values is really important, because at least for me, I want an agent for life. Like, I don't want to be bopping around and, trying to form new relationships. I think your editor can change over the course of your career, but ideally, I would like to have an agent for life, so you really want to make sure you have those same values.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, it was, do you have a philosophy about being an agent? And
Yes, okay, sorry, I got caught up.
It was
in
my
what
fault.
you
I
were saying.
took us on a weird rabbit hole.
No, I was thinking like, what am I supposed to say? I do have a philosophy about being an agent, and it's sort of, I'm going to try and keep it short. So a lot of what Katherine said, right, about preserving the art and preserving the author's vision, which is one reason why it's really important when you're talking to agents to hear how they see your book. Because when the book comes out, my name's not going to be on it. It's going to be my client's book. And the same thing when you're at the stage where the book is out on submission and you're talking to editors, right? So you don't want, this wasn't with Pemi, but this was with another client who wrote a short story collection, and a number of editors, we had all these calls, said, could you turn it into a novel? And he, we had this conversation because you could call the book a novel in stories, linked stories, whatever you want to call it, but it is a collection. And a number of editors said, we see this as a novel. And, in the sort of after the call, he said, I don't see this as a novel, and this is not what I want, and this is not sort of, for lack of a better word, respecting my vision. And so, that goes back to what Katherine's saying. And so it's my job to sort of find those editors who will respect my client's vision. So I'll just leave it at that.
I guess I want to ask then, the writers, do you feel that, I mean, you in some ways addressed this by saying that you want the agent for life, but have you seen the relationship with Katherine or the relationship with Renée evolve over time as you've worked with each other?
I mean, absolutely. Renée has seen so many horrible drafts.
They weren't horrible.
Okay, you're so kind. They were horrible. So many horrible drafts. And when you keep doing that again and again and again with somebody, that just, there's so much trust that is built. I trust her taste. I trust her edits. Even when I might, bristle, I take a breath, take a nap, and then I'm like, I understand what Renée is saying. So yes, the relationship just with time and different projects, we did so many stories together. We've done so many drafts of the novel together. We've, gone through so many contracts together. Just with time, the trust has built. She hasn't let me down yet.
Thank you.
So yes. The answer is yes, the relationship has evolved. We've just gotten, I think, more in sync. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's about trust, like you said. I mean, Katherine and I have been working together for 8 years now. No, 9 years.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And she's been there from the very beginning, you know, and I think that knowing that she has my back no matter what, knowing that she will support my work no matter what I want to write about, it gives me a great sense of peace while I'm doing the work, because there are many years when I'm working on my novel, and like I said, I don't show it to her until it's closer to done, that we're not like in conversation all the time, but I have a great sense of peace and confidence that I know that when I'm ready to show it to her, she will support it, and that she will give her feedback, but I know that she will help me refine it to be the best version of a book that I can make, and that then she will she has the expertise to find the editor that is the right fit. And that trust has just grown with time. We've published 2 books together now, and we've talked about the 3rd. So I think, that trust just continues to grow over time.
And so for the agents then, when you've built this trust with an author and you have a project that you really believe in, but you can't sell it, what do you do then?
I don't know what you're talking about. It's really heartbreaking. I mean, there are some agents out there who have a million projects, and so if they don't sell one, they're on to the next. But, Catherine and I don't have a million projects, so we're so emotionally invested in each one, right? We read it, you'll hear the expression fall in love, right? We're always falling in love. And so we also, there's a little bit of ego. I mean, I think as an agent, I try to remove my ego, and I'm pretty good about it most of the time. But when this thing is routinely rejected by editors, my ego takes a little bit of a beating, because I think, what's wrong with them? Like, why don't they see how brilliant this manuscript is? And then I have to sort of retreat, and then, we have to talk, my client and I have to talk, like, next steps. And, so I assume you mean when I have exhausted, like, every opportunity, meaning it's gone out to 45 or 50 editors, like big houses, truly indie houses, micro presses.
Well, maybe more just kind of like stepping perhaps less than your author expects, right? Or if the author thinks it's going to be with like a big publishing house,
Right.
but you're like, okay, we're going with a college press because that's what we got.
Right. The writer can always decide not to go with the university press if they think like, okay, I'm going to hold on to this and I'm working on something else. And, John Grisham, we're in the South, so I'm going to mention him. So his first book was actually, the first book that he wrote was A Time to Kill. But the first book that we published at Doubleday, my boss published at Doubleday, I should take that back, was The Firm. And then the second book came out after The Firm, took the world by storm, right? So there's no expiration date on a project that doesn't sell. And so sometimes maybe that's a conversation to have, like, okay, for whatever reason, these editors are blind to the brilliance on the page, so we're just going to put this aside and archive it for a while. And, we'll go out with your next book. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is the worst part of the job. Everyone's excited, we're going out with your novel, and then, in the most wonderful situation, the editor calls 2 days later, I stayed up all night reading it, I want to have an auction, yay. But then often that doesn't happen, and you're not getting the responses, and you think, oh my God, did I question your taste, what's happening? But I perhaps shouldn't admit this in public, but sometimes the editors, not always, but they have been known to be right. And I think I mention it just because this is such a weird bit. I mean, honestly, I guess everyone's job in here, that you bring your personality into it. You have a bad day at your job. We all, all jobs are somewhat similar in that way. But, one example I'll give, which I hope isn't too heavy, but I had a friend who took his own life, and I got a manuscript in probably the next week that was called The Suicide Detective. And it was about a guy who, it was... sort of a metaphysical, not a literal telling, but about someone who was a detective, was to figure out why someone took their own life. And, of course, the answer is we never really know. But in any case, I responded so strongly to the book because I had had that personal experience. And the person's a wonderful writer. And P.S., good news, she went on to publish another book that we sold to great reviews. But that first book, I look at it now, and it was a mess. I mean, it was a hot, stinking mess. And and no disrespect to her, but I just mean I hadn't done my job, I think, properly. I hadn't seen how problematic it was and how hard it was to sell, frankly. It was a great idea, beautiful writing, but just wasn't coming together. It was just too all over the place. And I see now that the editors were right in that case. And so it's just a strange business, too. So for those of you who are writers looking for an agent, when you send us your work, it could be we don't even look at it. I hate to say that, but because that day we're so overwhelmed with our own stuff, we're looking for a reason to say no. We get probably 50 or so queries a day from people, so it's just, a matter of sorting which to prioritizing. And, you might write something that just does not, for personal reasons, because that day, someone hit me with their grocery cart and your book's about, the great grocery store caper. I'm like, no. I'd like to think it's a little more scientific than that, but sometimes it just isn't. And so my point is that if an agent turns you down, it could be because your book needs work. It could also be that agent is just for whatever reason that is out of your control and you should not worry about, has nothing to do with you. They are not responding to it, or they are.
So that leads into my next question for everyone. Do you have advice for writers who are looking for an agent?
Don't send out your work too quickly. I think that's the biggest thing. I get query letters and I think, oh, this sounds interesting, and then I start reading it, and I think, oh, this is a draft that's not ready for my eyes. So, also if you have, if you're in a writer's group, share your work with friends who you believe will be honest. Will praise the parts that are great and will point out the parts that are not working, and think about that advice. But obviously you don't want advice from 10 writers, because then you get, what's the expression? A camel is a horse designed by committee. Then you get a camel instead of a thoroughbred, right? And we all want thoroughbreds. And the other thing we haven't really talked about is the query letter. And so, it's surprising to me someone will spend 4 years writing something and they just seem to dash off a query letter. And I think, no, you should spend time thinking about your query letter and how to write it. And you should send your query letter, once again, to friends who've read your work, and then friends who haven't. Because agents haven't read your work before they read the query. And so just make sure it's really smart. It doesn't go on too long, because we probably get the same kinds of query letters, like, I love to take long walks on the beach. I get these things that are like, I don't know, they seem like something you might find on Hinge or something. And so, we all like long walks on the beach, but really focus and why are you writing to me? Why are you writing to Catherine, right? What is it about our lists? Or maybe you met us at a conference, right? And then talk about your work, and don't compare it to, the top 2 slots in the New York Times bestseller list. We get a lot of those, because that's a really high bar. And we don't, by the way, when we don't pitch those things. We don't look at the New York Times list that week and take the top 2 or whatever. So be sort of realistic, right? And then, take a deep breath before you write it, and take some time, and then share your query letter, and then really make sure your novel is in the best shape possible. Because I guess this is the real piece of advice, is that when I read it, I don't expect it to be perfect, but I should be able to identify what it is. So if you're telling me you've written a mystery, it has to check off a number of boxes for mysteries. If you've written romantasy, because that's what everyone wants today, it has to check off those boxes. If you're writing literary fiction, it should check off those boxes.
Yeah, and I think I cannot emphasize enough Renee's point that revise. We're not looking for diamonds in the rough. Maybe back in the day, the old-timey agent days, it was like, this person, I can sell their book, but we get so much stuff, we expect the writers to have it in pretty good shape before you get to us. And then, speaking of the query letter, I went back and looked at your query letter not too long ago because I was trying to look for examples of good ones, because I remember yours was particularly good, because in a query letter, you want your description of the book to read like the published, dust jacket copy on a published book. Everything except for the words of praise about your own writing, let us decide that. But I remember yours was so, I just remember thinking, I want to drop what I'm doing, not pay attention at my son's soccer game and read this, because it was 1950s Korea, a love story, a war story, what it means to be a refugee in your own country. It was like catnip, and you just described it in a way where I thought, that's a world I don't know much about that I want to be in. and it was just your description, and there was no, you didn't go on too long. Like you took the essence of the book and really sold it to me in the most enticing way. And it's not so different from when you go to a bookstore. If you don't know the author, what makes you want to pick up a book that you don't know? It's same for us. We're gonna put aside our clients' drafts that we're supposed to be reading and read your thing. And so the description is really important. And you also did this thing, which is, I think, a really helpful thing for writers to do, is always, always tell the agent why you're writing to them in particular. Not because we're narcissists and need you to say, oh, you're a great agent, whatever. But, say something, if you loved Pemi's work and you want to submit to Renee, I think it probably goes a long way that you mentioned Pemi. And not just because, oh, you said something nice about my client, but I mean, a little bit, I will say that. But it shows that you know what Renee represents, that you've done your research, and that maybe your work, because you enjoyed Pemi's work, it resonates with you, it's similar to yours, or maybe not, but it shows why you're querying us, rather than you've spammed all of New York publishing to, and so what you did was, I remember you wrote that you really admired the work of two of my clients. I think it was Laura Vandenberg and Emily St. John Mandel, and your book is not necessarily like those, but you said the way that you picked out kind of thematically what you liked about their books and how it resonated with you, and how there was overlap with your book. And A+ on your grade. So 9 years later, I wanted to give you that grade.
It definitely helps.
I will say,
sorry.
No, you should go.
I was just going to say, it definitely helps, instead of like naming the clients that you represent, like, what is it about Ghost Roots that you love, right?
Yeah.
Like, because anyone can go online and pluck
Sure.
the titles of 3 books, and it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So, in a sentence or two, like, what is it about Pemi's book that you really loved, even if your book isn't really sort of adjacent to it?
Yeah.
But, that also shows me that you've done a little bit of research.
Yeah.
So you're not looking for comps up front. You'd rather hear what the essence
a
of
comp
the...
is sort of different.
Yeah.
Because a comp is like for marketing.
Right.
And I mean, that's a whole other panel, I think, about comps, because I don't know, we all have complicated feelings about comps, I
Right.
think.
I mean, I would say it's helpful if you can come up with books that inspired you, or that you think is the same audience as yours, especially if your book is kind of a cross-genre. If it's something that's sort of sci-fi but with lyrical prose, it's helped to mention a book that is doing that too. But you're right. I mean, the comp titles that publishers use might be very different. They might be using them for different purposes, for marketing and for sales, to have the shorthand way. But I always appreciate when someone does use a comp in a query letter, also because it shows that you know your genre really well, and you should be reading in your genre, being able to rattle off books in the last couple of years that have done well in your genre. And it doesn't mean you can't do that if you don't include it in your letter, but if you do include it in your letter, it shows me that you can, and that is helpful.
And it should really be a comp. I mean,
Right.
we all get queries where there are comps, and you start reading and you think,
Yeah.
no.
Nope.
The other thing, though, to think about the comp, it's about like a mood.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just like the genre. And so every once in a while, someone will write, like, I'm going to include a movie comp, because like tonally or emotionally it captures the same thing. And that's a useful bit of information as well.
I think we used Wuthering Heights, as one
I think so,
comp.
Wuthering
I mean,
Heights.
that was less like, of course, that book has not been sold in the last 2 years. Marketing is like, what am I going to do with Wuthering Heights? But I think we used it as like, to give someone a sense of, here's this book set in this wartime Korea with this love story
it's
happening.
kind of like an epic feel.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I wrote, I don't know, maybe 10 query letters, and I was really specific with each one because I wanted to start with my dream list, right? I wanted to like shoot for the stars. And those agents are all agents whose books I really admired. So like the one that I wrote for Katherine, I had a paragraph where I said, like Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11, that explores this, my novel does this. So I showed the ways in which there was something that I really admired by a writer that Katherine represented, and how that resonated with me in a certain way in my own novel. So, Station 11 is very different from If You Leave Me. But I was really strategic in all of my query letters and very specific. And I did get a response from I got a response from every agent. And I think that's because they could see that I was very genuine about wanting to work with them,
Nice.
Well, since my path wasn't typical, I don't want to give advice that I haven't, But I might say maybe once you have a few agents who are interested in you, then you should do your research about how they work with their clients. Sometimes that means talking to some of their existing clients. Sometimes it's asking them directly, how do you communicate? Because the two friends I know who had to part ways with their agent was because they didn't like how they were being communicated with. So even though they did get like their dream agent, that dream agent was so busy that they never ever, they didn't have time to call and say, that personal relationship, the consistency, they didn't get that, but they were, I guess, wooed by the idea that this person had sold like a million books for $1 million. So yeah, like being realistic about your style and making sure that that matches with how this agent also operates. Yeah.
Well, you both had very different experiences with getting agents. And it sounds like Renee and Katherine are always inundated with queries. But how do you balance the like seeking versus writers coming to you? In other words, in your just reading, if you see a writer who's unrepresented, and you might say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to reach out to them." Do you do that, or do you just wait for all the queries come into you?
Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, I do that, actually. That's how I got Kelly Link a million years ago. I wrote a story of hers in a chapbook, and I wrote this very formal letter to Small Beer Press, not realizing who it was, that was Kelly. So, and I talked about how when I was an editor, like, I'd been the underbidder for Civil War Land in bad decline, not that I still think about it, I don't know, 30 years ago. And that I thought we would be a good match, and I'd published Jonathan Carroll, and sort of why I got what she was doing. And then, she sent me something, and then eventually, I mean, she'd self-published Stranger Things Happen, and then, we sort of went on, and it's 6 books later. But, yeah, if I see something, I first do research to make sure that the writer isn't represented, because I don't want to be that agent. And then I'll write a MASH note. And I've had, one story, I mean, all those places. And because I represent a lot of short story writers, I read, a bunch of different literary magazines where I'm looking for writers and,
Yeah, I mean, I should do that more. I feel like that's something I, lately, just for whatever reason, you can sort of go through phases too, like in any job where you're kind of more proactive and then you're sort of so inundated, so at the moment I feel like I'm not doing as good a job of that, but when you do, it's a really fun part to reach out to someone who's like, I'm sorry, is this a joke? I mean, not that we're that, that important, but for a writer who's trying to get published, an agent calls you out of the blue, like it's I think pretty cool for them. And I did find I have one young adult writer who's an exception to my mostly otherwise adult list, and she forgives me for not knowing the YA landscape, but I found her when I was a baby, know-nothing agent in a issue of Iowa Review. And the reason I think I'm mentioning the story too is that for those of you who are aspiring writers, it's so helpful if you can try to get published in magazines if you can, even if it's the toenail podunk journal, like just the practice of being published, and also you just never know what agent's gonna be looking through that illustrious review I just mentioned. But in her case, I think it was the Iowa Review. I read the story of hers, I'll never forget, it was called The Sugar Shack. I loved it. I contacted her. She said, well, I'm actually working on a novel that this story is part of. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is great. I read part of the novel, it was great. And then she said, months later, I can't ever publish this novel because has to do with the religious community where my mom still lives, and she'll get I can't do it. And I was like, well, can we have a witness protection program for your mom? Like, what do you do? And so anyway, she squashed that novel, but the next book she sent me was a young adult book. And I thought I have no idea what to do with young adult, but I ended up loving it and hilarity ensued. But so it's a really fun part when you're scrappy like that. But mostly I think it's authors coming, at least for me, coming to me through referrals often. So keep networking.
Great. Okay. Well, that's a good word to end on. Keep a network, I guess, then. Thank you.